It was an ordinary Wednesday morning at the Pinewood Police Department, a little too quiet for most of the officers who preferred the usual hustle and bustle of ongoing investigations. The station was alive with the low hum of chatter and ringing. Phones when the front door swung open, and in walked the last person anyone expected to see, Elon Musk. Yes, that Elon Musk, the billionaire genius, the tech mogul, and the face of some of the most groundbreaking innovations in history. The man who had revolutionized the electric car industry, sent rockets to space, and recently became one of President Donald Trump's closest allies in the effort to reform the United States government. Musk had arrived unannounced, and to say his presence was unexpected was an understatement. Officer Jenkins, fresh out of the academy and still green around the gills, was the first to notice him. He looked up from his desk, blinking in disbelief, his hand frozen mid-air as he reached for his coffee. He'd seen Musk in the news plenty of times, of course, but seeing him in person, here in the police station of all places, was another thing entirely. Is that Elon Musk?" Jenkins muttered, his voice barely audible over the noise of the station. His voice carried just enough to attract the attention of Officer Thompson, a seasoned veteran of the department who had seen his fair share of strange occurrences. Thompson squinted toward the entrance. "Well, I'll be damned. Looks like it." Musk was wearing his usual uniform, a black t-shirt and jeans, looking every bit the billionaire on a mission. He didn't seem to have the slightest care in the world for the dozens of eyes now trained on him. He walked past the front desk as if it were any other day, completely at ease, making his way deeper into the station without a word to anyone. As the sound of his footsteps echoed through the corridor, Jenkins rushed to the front of the desk. His curiosity piqued. Should we stop him?" he asked, looking to Thompson for direction. Thompson, who had seen everything from high-speed chases to political protests, narrowed his eyes. "I think we let him come to us." And so they waited. The minutes stretched on, each one feeling longer than the last, as the rest of the officers exchanged puzzled glances. Musk hadn't so much as looked back, and the tension in the air was palpable. What was he doing here? More importantly, why? Finally, Musk reached the back of the station, where Captain Harris was meeting with a few of the senior officers. As Musk stepped into the room, Harris's eyes widened in surprise. He stood up from his desk, clearly unsure of how to handle the situation. "Mr. Musk, what brings you to our humble department?" Musk smiled, but there was a seriousness behind his eyes that none of the officers had expected. "I'm here on a mission," he said, his voice calm but firm. The room fell silent. Everyone leaned in, eager to hear more. "Reforming the justice system in this country isn't going to be easy," Musk continued, his eyes scanning the room. "But it has to start somewhere, and right here is as good a place as any." "Captain," Harris raised an eyebrow, clearly puzzled. "You're here to reform us?" Musk nodded. "I'm not just here to visit. I have a plan to help, to improve how you do your jobs, to make things more efficient, more just." Officer Thompson, who had been standing at the doorway, felt his skepticism rise. "I'm sorry, but what makes you think you can just walk in here and change the way we work?" Musk turned toward Thompson, locking eyes with him. "Because I've already changed the world once, and I'm here to do it again." The room grew still as Musk's words hung in the air. The officers weren't sure how to respond. Some were curious, others were defensive, but none could deny that this was going to be a conversation unlike any other they'd had in their careers. And as Musk continued speaking, his voice steady and unwavering, the officers began to realize that this wasn't just some high-profile visit. This was the beginning of something much bigger. But what exactly? And how would it all play out? As the clock ticked on, one thing became abundantly clear. Things at Pinewood Police Department were about to change in ways no one could have ever imagined. The room was filled with an uncomfortable silence, the officers still trying to process. The unexpected visit from Elon Musk stood frozen, unsure of how to react. Musk, however, didn't seem to mind the tension. He casually took a seat in the chair across from Captain Harris, the air around him electric with the gravity of what he had just said. "I've been working on a system," Musk continued, his voice calm and composed. A system that uses AI and real-time data analytics to transform how law enforcement agencies respond to crime. It's not just about solving cases faster, it's about understanding the bigger picture and improving community relations, reducing biases and enhancing overall efficiency. And I'm here because I want your department to be one of the first to test it. Captain Harris, still processing the shock of having one of the most influential people in the world sitting in his office, let out a slow breath. I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Musk. We have our own ways of doing things here. What exactly are you proposing? Musk leaned forward slightly, his eyes gleaming with enthusiasm. I'm proposing that you implement a new system that uses predictive analytics, facial recognition, and real-time crime mapping. The system would help officers like you make decisions based on data, decisions that are more informed and less prone to human error or bias. It would provide you with the tools to prevent crimes before they happen and track criminals more effectively. There was a slight buzz in the room as the officers exchanged glances. Officer Jenkins, who had been quiet up until this point, raised his hand hesitantly. Sorry to interrupt, sir, but that sounds like something straight out of a science fiction movie. How can we trust something like that? What if it goes wrong? What if it makes things worse? Musk turned his gaze to Jenkins, his expression softening. I understand your concerns. When I first launched Tesla and SpaceX, people thought they were impossible. But the technology we're talking about here isn't fiction. It's real, and it's already working in smaller pilot programs across the country. The systems have been tested, refined, and validated. What I'm offering you is the next step forward. Officer Thompson, who had been skeptical from the moment Musk walked in, folded his arms across his chest. And why should we trust you? You're a billionaire tech guy, not a cop. What makes you think you understand how we work? This is real life, it's not a startup project. Musk didn't flinch. In fact, he seemed to embrace Thompson's challenge. I'm not trying to replace the work you do. I respect what you all do here. But I've seen firsthand how technology can change industries, how it can make processes smarter, faster, and more effective. And I believe the same can happen here. I'm not suggesting you stop doing your jobs. I'm suggesting you have better tools to do your jobs. Tools that work with you, not against you. Captain Harris was silent for a moment, his fingers steepled in front of him as he pondered the implications. The room had shifted, the mood more tense now. Some officers, like Jenkins, were intrigued by the idea of using new technology to aid their work, while others, like Thompson, remained deeply skeptical. Finally, Harris spoke up. Let's assume for a second that this is all real, that this system can actually help us. What's the catch, Musk? What's your angle here? Musk smiled. No catch, no angle. The goal is simple. Reform. There's been a long-standing issue with how policing is done across the country. The system is outdated, and it needs to evolve. I'm here to be part of that change. The government wants to reform, and they've asked me to help. You're not just part of this department. You're part of something much bigger. Thompson's eyebrows shot up at this last statement. The government? What does this have to do with President Trump? Musk's expression grew more serious. It has everything to do with it. The president's administration has made it clear that it wants to modernize and streamline government operations across every sector, and law enforcement is at the top of that list. I'm working with the White House to make sure we have the right systems in place. This is a national initiative. Pinewood is just the beginning. The weight of his words hung in the air like a thick fog. Elon Musk wasn't just talking about a few tweaks to policing, he was talking about a fundamental overhaul of how law enforcement worked in America. And he wanted Pinewood Police Department to be at the center of it. Officer Jenkins, who had been mostly quiet, finally spoke up again. But what happens if we fail? What happens if the technology doesn't work the way it's supposed to? Musk's eyes softened, his tone more reassuring. Failure isn't an option, Jenkins. We'll be here to support you every step of the way. There will be mistakes, yes, but we'll learn from them. We'll adapt, and I believe the changes we're implementing will ultimately make your job easier and safer for everyone involved. There was a long pause as the officers absorbed this information. The room was a mix of doubt, curiosity, and cautious optimism. Some were still unsure about the new system, while others saw an opportunity to revolutionize how they worked. Thompson stood up, pacing back and forth. "I don't know, Musk. This sounds too risky. What's to stop the system from being hacked or manipulated? What's to stop it from getting out of control?" Musk met Thompson's gaze with a steady, unflinching look. "The system is designed with safeguards. It's constantly monitored, constantly evolving. And just like any new technology, there will be oversight. You'll have control over it. But it's time we stop thinking small and start thinking big." As the room fell into another round of silence, Captain Harris finally spoke up. "Okay, I think we've heard enough for today. We need some time to process this, but I have to admit this isn't what I expected when I came into work today." Musk nodded. "I get it. Change is never easy, but I'm confident this is the future. You'll see." He stood up, ready to leave, but not before turning to the officers with one last word. "This is just the beginning. If you're willing to take the leap, we'll be here to support you. And who knows, maybe Pinewood will be the model for every police department in the country." As Musk walked out of the room, the officers sat in stunned silence. The impact of what had just happened hadn't fully sunk in yet, but one thing was clear. Pinewood Police Department was about to become a testing ground for a new era of policing. The days following Elon Musk's unexpected visit were a whirlwind of uncertainty and intrigue. Pinewood Police Department had always prided itself on being traditional in its methods, relying on tried-and-true policing techniques to keep the community safe. But now, in the wake of Musk's promise of a high-tech overhaul, the officers found themselves at a crossroads. Captain Harris sat at his desk, his brow furrowed as he sifted through case files. He hadn't yet made a decision about Musk's proposal, and the pressure to act was mounting. The thought of embracing new technology, especially one with so much promise and so many unknowns, was a daunting prospect. But then, just as he was about to call a department-wide meeting to discuss it, the phone rang and the weight of reality came crashing in. "Captain Harris," the voice on the other end was sharp, urgent. "We have a situation. A big one." His heart skipped a beat. "What's going on?" "There's been a series of robberies in the downtown area," the voice continued, a touch of panic creeping in. "But this isn't just any string of crimes. We believe it's the work of the notorious criminal gang, the Ravens. They've been moving across the state, hitting one town after another, and now they're here. Our informants say they've got something big planned, something that will shake the entire city." Harris exhaled slowly, trying to keep his cool. "All right, keep me updated. I'll gather the team." As soon as the call ended, Harris picked up the department's internal phone, paging the officers for an emergency meeting. Within minutes, the team gathered in the briefing room, their faces a mix of determination and anxiety. Officer Thompson was the first to speak. "What do we know about these guys?" "The Ravens are notorious for being smart, dangerous, and elusive. We can't let them slip through our fingers." Captain Harris nodded, flipping through the notes on his desk. "We know that they're well organized and usually operate under the radar. They've been involved in everything from armed robberies to human trafficking. Our sources say they have a major heist planned for tonight. We need to catch them before it happens." The officers looked at one another, the weight of the task settling in. But as the room buzzed with chatter about strategy and manpower, Harris's thoughts turned back to the technology Musk had offered. This was the moment. If the system Musk promised was as powerful as he claimed, it could be the edge they needed to track down the Ravens and prevent disaster. "All right," Harris spoke, gathering the room's attention. "We're going to need all hands on deck for this one, but I'm going to take a risk. We're going to test Musk's system. If it works like he says, we could have the information we need to take these guys down." There was a brief pause. As the officers absorbed this decision, Officer Jenkins, who had warmed to the idea of the system, spoke up. "Are you sure about this, Captain? I mean, we're talking about running this in real time with a gang like the Ravens. It's a huge risk." Captain Harris met his gaze. "We don't have time to play it safe anymore. If Musk's system can help us, we'll use it. But we need to move fast." The officers murmured in agreement, and soon they were all on their way to begin preparations for the operation. Meanwhile, Elon Musk was not far away. After leaving Pinewood Police Department, he had spent the day in meetings finalizing the details of his proposed technology. He had received a text from Captain Harris asking for a demonstration of the system, and he knew this was the moment of truth. If the system could help solve a crisis like this, it would cement the legitimacy of his plan and push the department closer to full implementation. Musk's team had already uploaded the latest data into the system, feeding in information about the Ravens and their criminal activities. The AI had already been analyzing patterns from the past few weeks, predicting their movements and mapping out potential hideouts. Now, it was time to see if the system could live up to the hype. Back at the station, the officers were gathered around the command center, staring at the giant monitors displaying real-time data. Captain Harris stood at the front, eyes focused, while Jenkins and Thompson hovered near the back, each with their own mix of doubt and curiosity. "Let's see what this thing can do," Harris said, more to himself than anyone else. He pressed a button, and the screen flickered to life, displaying a detailed map of Pinewood and surrounding areas. The AI system quickly zoomed in on several areas of interest. The gang's most recent activities, based on previous data, were highlighted in red, with probable targets for their next move marked in yellow. The system also gave real-time crime alerts, showing incidents happening across the city. "Officer." Jenkins leaned forward, squinting at the screen. "Wait a minute, look at this. The Ravens are planning to hit the city bank, but they're not going to use the front entrance like they usually do. They're going to enter through the old loading dock on the back." The system, analyzing a variety of factors, had already suggested the location based on past patterns of behavior. Musk's technology was working, and it was working fast. "Is this the kind of thing Musk was talking about?" Thompson muttered, his arms still crossed. Captain Harris nodded, a tight smile forming on his face. "Looks like it." The officers quickly mobilized, splitting up into teams to cover key locations. The map on the screen updated in real time, showing the positions of officers as they moved toward their targets. The system sent notifications to their devices, updating them with new intelligence as they went. By the time they reached the bank, they were ready. The Ravens hadn't anticipated such a precise response, and the operation unfolded with military-like efficiency. The gang members were caught before they could even step foot inside the building. What had once seemed like an impossible scenario was now under control. Back at the station, the officers exchanged high fives and relieved sighs. They had done it. The system had delivered. As Captain Harris watched the team celebrate, he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. He had doubted the technology at first, but now, seeing it in action, he knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. The celebratory atmosphere in the Pinewood Police Department didn't last long. As the officers high-fived and congratulated one another, Captain Harris couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the gang they had just apprehended was only the tip of the iceberg. They'd caught the Ravens in a well-executed operation, but something about it all felt too muzzy. The system, powered by Musk's technology, had made it all look simple. The AI had mapped out the criminals' every move, predicted their behavior, and led them straight to the hideout. But Harris had been in law enforcement long enough to know that things were rarely this clean. A single win didn't mean they were out of danger. If anything, it made him more suspicious. At that moment, his phone buzzed with an encrypted message. The text was short, but the words sent a chill down his spine. "The Ravens are not alone. This is bigger than you think. You've only scratched the surface." X Harris stared at the message, his pulse quickening. Who was X, and what did they mean by bigger than you think? Was this some kind of warning or a veiled threat? He immediately gathered the team in the conference room. Officers Jenkins, Thompson, and the rest of the department took their seats, still riding the high of the earlier success. But Harris could tell they were about to be pulled back down into something much darker. "I just got this message," Harris began, his voice steady, but carrying a weight none of the officers had heard before. "It's from someone named X. They're claiming that the Ravens are just part of a much larger operation. I don't know who they are, or how they know what we've been working on, but I think we've only scratched the surface." Thompson, still skeptical of the new system, crossed his arms and leaned back in his chair. "What are we supposed to do with a cryptic message like that? We've already locked up the ravens. Maybe this is just someone trying to stir up trouble. Harris shook his head. I'm not buying it. That message came through too clearly. Whoever this is knows exactly what we've been working on, and they know what we've just uncovered. We need to find out who X is and what they're talking about. Officer Jenkins, ever the optimist, spoke up. Maybe we can use the system to trace the message. If it's encrypted, we should be able to decrypt it and track down the source. Already on it, Harris replied. But this isn't just about the message. It's about what's coming next. We've put a dent in the ravens, but someone or something wants to make sure we don't stop there. Jenkins sat forward, his hands clasped together. So we're saying this could be bigger than just a robbery ring? What's the angle? Drugs? Human trafficking? That's what we need to figure out, Harris answered. And if this X-person is telling the truth, we could be looking at something much larger. A whole network, maybe even international in scope. We need to be prepared for anything. Just then, the tech team working with the AI system called in with an update. Captain, we've decrypted the message. It's coming from a location in the city, a warehouse on the outskirts near the docks. We've also traced the IP to several high-profile criminal organizations, and their connections to the ravens are stronger than we thought. The room fell into stunned silence. Harris felt the ground shift beneath him. The ravens weren't a standalone gang. They were part of a much bigger web, a web he hadn't even seen until now. We need to move. Now, Harris barked, his tone hardening. Get a tactical team ready, and send a few officers to check out the warehouse. I don't want to rush in without intel, but we can't afford to wait any longer. Hours later, the team was gathered. Again, this time outside the suspected warehouse. The shadows of the docks loomed around them as they crouched behind their vehicles, waiting for the right moment to strike. Harris and his officers were a mixture of nerves and determination. They'd faced dangerous criminals before, but nothing of this scale. The AI system was feeding real-time data to their devices, providing live updates of movement inside the warehouse. It was eerily silent. Too silent. Nothing seems off yet, Jenkins whispered, scanning the area through binoculars. I don't see any obvious threats. No one's moving. Stay alert, Harris replied, his eyes scanning the building. The calm before the storm can be the most dangerous part. Let's get eyes on the inside before we make a move. As if on cue, the system pinged a notification. A few seconds. Later, a video feed of the warehouse interior popped up on Harris's tablet. The grainy footage showed a group of men unloading crates. Their faces were obscured, but the way they moved, coordinated, methodical, felt wrong. Harris zoomed in. On the footage. They're armed, Thompson said, his voice tense. And those crates, those aren't the kind of crates you just use for merchandise. We're talking weapons, possibly explosives. The realization hit Harris hard. This wasn't just about a simple heist or a string of robberies. They were dealing with something far more dangerous. It wasn't just criminals. They were dealing with an organized, well-equipped group that had plans much larger than local thefts. We need to move in, Harris ordered, his voice steady but urgent. On my mark, we stormed the building. Be ready for anything. The team positioned themselves, adrenaline coursing through their veins as they waited for the signal. The AI system continued to update them with live feeds and predictive analytics, tracking movements and offering tactical suggestions. It was time. Go. The officers rushed forward, taking positions as they stormed the building with precision. What they found inside shocked them. Crates of weapons, rifles, explosives, and high-tech gear were stacked in the corners of the warehouse. But there was something else, something that made Harris's blood run cold. At the far side of the warehouse, behind a wall of crates, were several computer terminals, each one running some kind of surveillance software. And at the center of it all was a man, someone Harris had never seen before, but his presence sent a chill through the room. He was standing in front of a giant screen displaying live feeds from various locations around the city, including the Pinewood Police Department itself. The silence in the warehouse was deafening. Captain Harris stood frozen, staring at the man in front of him. His mind raced, trying to process the sight before him, the computer terminals, the surveillance footage, and the cold, calculating eyes of the man who stood at the heart of it all. The man wasn't just some thug or gang leader. This was someone with power, intelligence, and a chilling level of control. The officers moved in quickly, weapons drawn, but the man didn't flinch. He simply smiled, slowly, almost as if he was enjoying the moment. "Well, well, well," the man said, his voice smooth yet laced with an eerie calm. "I was wondering how long it would take you to find me." Harris's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't recognize the man, but there was something about him that felt familiar, like he'd been on the periphery of this operation for a long time, watching from the shadows. But who was he? What was his connection to the Ravens? And how? Far did his reach extend? "Who are you?" Harris demanded, his voice cold. The man's smile only widened. "You can call me Kane," he said, his tone dripping with arrogance. "I'm the one who makes sure everything runs smoothly. The Ravens, the other gangs, they all answer to me. And now, Captain, it looks like you've finally caught up. But I'm afraid it's too late for you." The officers tightened their grip on their weapons, but no one moved. There was an unspoken understanding that Harris needed to handle this conversation. The more they knew, the better their chances of taking Kane down. "What do you want?" Harris asked, trying to keep his voice steady, though he could feel the tension creeping up his spine. Kane's eyes flickered to the computer screens behind him, which were displaying live feeds of the police station, the city's main streets, and several other strategic locations. "What do I want?" "Oh, Captain, I already have everything I want. Control, influence, power. And now I want to see how you react when the pieces start to fall into place." Harris's mind raced. This was no ordinary criminal. Kane had been monitoring their every move, probably for weeks, and now he was making his move. But what did he mean by pieces? And why the police department? Why Pinewood? "You're the one behind the Ravens?" Thompson asked, stepping forward cautiously. Kane nodded. "Yes and no. The Ravens are just a tool, one of many that I use to maintain order. You see, Captain, in a world like this, chaos is the only thing that keeps people in check. The gangs, the criminals, they're just distractions. But the real power lies in the system, the surveillance, the control. That's where I come in." Harris's stomach dropped. "You've been pulling strings with the police department's own surveillance systems?" Kane smiled, leaning back casually against the stack of crates. "Oh, not just surveillance, Captain. I've been pulling much more than that. Your little AI system, Elon Musk's precious technology, it was a gift, wasn't it? But you have no idea who gave it to you, do you?" The pieces clicked into place in Harris's mind. This wasn't just a rogue criminal. It was someone who understood the very systems they were trying to use to fight back. This was someone who was in control of the technology, someone who had anticipated their every move. "You're saying you helped Musk build it?" Harris asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Kane chuckled softly, a low, menacing sound. "Not exactly, but I had a hand in guiding its development. Musk's system was just the beginning. You see, while you were busy trying to stop the gangs, I was already steps ahead, feeding information into your systems, making sure you were playing my game. All the while, I've been building my network, strengthening my grip on power." The implications of what Kane was saying hit Harris like a ton of bricks. Musk's technology wasn't just a tool for good. It was a Trojan horse, something that Kane had used to manipulate and control the police force without them even knowing it. "Why the police?" Harris demanded. "What do you want with us?" Kane straightened, his expression becoming more serious. "I don't want anything from you, Captain. At least not directly. But you and your little department are a necessary piece in the grander scheme of things. You see, once I have full control of this city, and once I've secured all the networks from the police to the government, I can expand. I can take this beyond Pinewood. And you, Captain, are just a stepping stone on my path to global domination." Harris felt a cold sweat trickle down his neck. This wasn't about money or power over a city. Kane's ambitions were far more dangerous. This was about control on a scale Harris couldn't even begin to comprehend. "You think you can control everything?" Harris asked, a mix of anger and disbelief in his voice. "You've already failed. The Ravens are in custody and your network is falling apart." Kane didn't flinch. "The Ravens are just one piece of my plan, a small one. And as for the network, well, you're assuming I haven't prepared for something like this." He reached out and tapped a button on one of the computer terminals. The monitors flickered, and for a moment the room went dark. When the lights came back on, the officers were in shock. On the monitors were live feeds, not just of the police station, but of their families, their homes, their every move. It was clear now. Kane wasn't just after the city. He had infiltrated their lives, their most private spaces. "This is only the beginning, Captain," Kane said, his voice dripping with malice. "The moment you think you've won, I'll be right there, and you'll never see me coming." The warehouse felt like a pressure cooker, the air thick with tension and the cold hum of technology in the background. Harris and his team now, surrounded by armed men, had only one chance to survive: outsmart Kane and his forces before it was too late. The emergency red lights threw long shadows across the concrete floor, illuminating the faces of the men who had once been police officers, now caught in a deadly game they hadn't chosen to play. Harris felt the weight of his team's eyes on him. The fear was palpable, but so was the resolve. They were not going down without a fight. They couldn't, not when their families, their city, and everything they'd fought for was hanging by a thread. "Everyone stay calm," Harris whispered, his voice low but steady. He had to keep his composure. His people were looking to him for guidance. "We need a plan, and we need it fast." Kane stood at the center of the room, his expression unreadable, his cold eyes flicking from one officer to the next, as if he were inspecting his next move on a chessboard. "You think you can outsmart me?" he asked almost pityingly. "You think this is some kind of game? I've already won." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Harris could feel the sting of Kane's confidence, his certainty that this was the end. But Harris refused to give up. They had fought too hard, risked too much. "We're not done yet, Kane," Harris said, his voice filled with quiet defiance. "You've made a mistake. You think you've got us cornered, but you haven't." Kane raised an eyebrow. "And what makes you think that?" Harris locked eyes with his team, giving them a silent nod. They knew what had to be done. In the chaos of the moment, they could use the one advantage they had left, the element of surprise. "Jenkins," Harris muttered. "Get to the panel now." The young officer, his face set with determination, moved quickly toward the control panel in the far corner of the room. His fingers flew over the keys, accessing the AI system that was their last line of defense. Harris knew they didn't have much time. Kane's men were closing in, and every second they waited felt like an eternity. "Come on, come on," Jenkins whispered under his breath, sweat dripping down his forehead. Just as Kane turned his attention back to Harris, the warehouse was plunged into complete darkness. The sudden switch from the harsh red emergency lights to complete blackness was disorienting, but it was exactly what they needed. Harris had known that the system still had one last trick up its sleeve, the ability to override Kane's control. If Jenkins could trigger the system's failsafe, they'd have a brief window of opportunity to take back control. Harris immediately moved into action. He motioned to his team, signaling them to move in and take down Kane's men. "Now!" he shouted. The officers moved with precision, knowing exactly what to do. In the darkness, their training kicked in. Silent movements, strategic positioning, and quick, efficient takedowns. Kane's armed forces were caught off guard. They had expected a fight, but not from a team as determined and resourceful as Harris's. In the chaos, Harris found himself face to face with Kane, who hadn't budged from his position. The man stood there, almost too calm for someone who had just lost control of his own operation. "You think you've won, Captain?" Kane sneered. "You've just delayed the inevitable. The city will fall and you will be nothing but a footnote in my history." Harris didn't hesitate. "You're wrong, it's over." With a swift motion, Harris lunged at Kane, knocking him to the ground. The two men grappled, each trying to gain the upper hand. Kane was strong, but Harris had the resolve of a man, fighting for everything he held dear. He pinned Kane to the ground, his breathing heavy. "You don't control anything anymore," Harris said, his voice low, filled with resolve. "This ends now." As the lights flickered back on, the warehouse revealed a scene of chaos. Kane's men were subdued, handcuffed, or unconscious. Jenkins stood by the control panel, wiping sweat from his brow, but his face held the satisfaction of a job well done. "We've got control of the network again," Jenkins said, his voice steady despite the tension that still hung in the air. "The AI is back online. We can shut him down." Harris nodded, keeping his eyes on Kane, who now lay on the ground. breathing heavily but looking as defiant as ever. "This is the end for you. You've played your hand, but you lost. You'll never see the power you crave." Kane's eyes flashed with something dark. "You think this is over? You have no idea what you've just unleashed. You think this is just about you, about your city. You've just cracked the surface. You've made a powerful enemy, Captain. And when I rise again, it won't be just the city at stake, it'll be the world." Harris clenched his jaw, disgusted by the man's arrogance. "No, you're done." The officers took control, securing the warehouse and arresting Kane's remaining men. The AI was now fully under their control again, and the city's infrastructure was slowly being restored. But Harris knew that while they had stopped one threat, the war wasn't over. Kane had been just a single piece of a much larger, more dangerous game. "We need to get him back to the station," Harris said, signaling for the officers to escort Kane out. "And then we need to find out what else he's been planning." As Kane was led away, still seething with rage, Harris couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The city was safe for now, but the threats were far from over. Kane was just one player in a game much bigger than he had ever realized, and whatever was coming next, Harris knew it was going to be even more dangerous. The air in the precinct was thick with unease as Harris paced back and forth in front of the interrogation room. Kane had been locked inside for hours, and despite the obvious tension, Harris knew they were still missing something. Kane wasn't the kind of man to crumble under pressure. He had plans within plans, and every word that came from his mouth was likely a calculated move to distract or mislead them. "Anything?" Harris asked, looking at Jenkins, who was hunched over a laptop, scanning through the data they'd recovered from the AI network. Jenkins didn't take his eyes off the screen. "Nothing concrete yet, but Kane's network is deep. I mean, really, deep. We're talking global, not just citywide. This AI isn't just something he built to control us. It's been used to manipulate markets, political systems, and even governments." "Great," Harris muttered. "Just what we needed. A man who thinks he's playing chess on a global scale." "You don't understand," Jenkins said, his voice urgent. Kane didn't just want power, he wanted control over everything. Every bit of information, every communication. He could have changed world events with the push of a button. He could have crashed economies, started wars, manipulated elections. The scale of this thing is enormous. Harris's mind raced. "We need to figure out who else is involved. Someone else has to be backing him. That's what I'm working on." Jenkins typed rapidly, fingers flying over the keyboard. "But I can't get a full trace on Kane's transactions. It's like he had multiple layers of encryption, and someone's helping him keep it all under wraps." Harris nodded grimly. "Keep digging. We need to know who Kane's partners are before it's too late." Meanwhile, in the interrogation room, Kane sat quietly. His hands were cuffed to the table, but his posture was unbothered. He looked almost bored, as if the whole ordeal was just a nuisance to him. He had been silent for hours, refusing to answer any of their questions. But Harris knew that silence could only last so long. Kane's arrogance was his weakness, and in the end, that would be his undoing. Harris walked into the room and took a seat across from Kane. The man didn't even flinch, his steely eyes never leaving Harris's face. "You're not going to win," Kane said flatly. "You can't stop what's already set in motion." Harris leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "I don't need to win. I just need to make sure you don't." Kane chuckled softly, the sound grating on Harris's nerves. "You think taking me down will stop anything? It's too late. The damage is done. My network is everywhere, and you're not even aware of half of it." Harris's jaw tightened. He knew Kane wasn't going to break easily, but that didn't mean he couldn't push. "You're not invincible, Kane. You've made mistakes, big ones, and I'll find them." Kane smiled, almost pityingly. "You really think you're in control here? It's over. You're out of your depth." Before Harris could respond, the door to the room burst open. Jenkins rushed in, his face pale, eyes wide with fear. "Boss," he said breathlessly, "you need to see this." Harris stood quickly, following Jenkins out of the room. Something wasn't right. The look on Jenkins's face told him that whatever they were about to discover, it wasn't good. As they reached the operations room, Jenkins turned to him with a look of disbelief. "We found a pattern in Kane's code. It's not just financial systems or government communications. There's something else, a series of encrypted files, and they're linked to people in power, high up, people we thought were untouchable. Harris's stomach dropped. Who? Jenkins swallowed hard, then turned the screen toward Harris. The list of names that appeared was enough to make Harris's blood run cold. It was a who's who of influential figures, ranging from corporate moguls to high-ranking politicians. But there was one name that stood out above all the rest. Donald Trump, Harris murmured. What the hell is his name doing here? Jenkins looked at him, his face grave. That's not all. There's a series of meetings scheduled. Kane's been pulling the strings behind the scenes, connecting with these people. They've been in contact with him, and the files indicate a plan to reorganize the entire government system. Harris's mind raced. Trump had been a key figure in the national political landscape for years, and if Kane was involved with him, if he had somehow manipulated him or gotten close enough to influence him, it meant the stakes were much higher than they had realized. Where is he? Harris demanded. Where's Trump now? Jenkins hesitated. The files are incomplete, but there's a lead, a meeting in Pinewood. It's scheduled for tomorrow morning. It could be our only chance to find out what's really going on. Harris made a snap decision. We move out, now. The ride to Pinewood was a blur of flashing lights and the sound of sirens as Harris's team rushed to get to the location before it was too late. Every second felt like a countdown to a disaster they couldn't fully comprehend yet. As they arrived, the small town was eerily quiet, the kind of place that never saw the chaos of the city. But Harris knew better. This was no ordinary meeting. This was the beginning of something far worse. They parked a block away, taking cover behind the trees as they scoped out the location. A large, well-guarded mansion sat at the top of a hill, its gates guarded by armed security. There were several black SUVs parked outside, their tinted windows revealing nothing. Harris's instincts told him that this was where the answers lay. If he could just get inside, he would finally uncover the truth. The team silently moved into position. They were ready for anything. But even as they approached the mansion, Harris couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen that would change everything. The mansion loomed in the distance, its cold, imposing structure standing, stark against the twilight sky. Harris could feel his pulse quicken as they moved closer, his breath steady despite the mounting tension in his chest. The quiet of Pinewood was deceptive. It was a calm that covered a storm about to break. His team was positioned strategically, concealed in the shadows, weapons ready, nerves taut. They knew that whatever was waiting for them behind those gates could change everything. But the truth they sought was within reach, and they couldn't afford to hesitate. Remember, we stick to the plan, Harris whispered to his team. In, stand out. No mistakes. Jenkins nodded, his face tense. We've got this. The mansion was heavily guarded, but Harris had a plan. A combination of surveillance tech and insider intel had given them the upper hand. They knew the security codes, knew the layout of the building, and knew that there was one vulnerable point, a small maintenance door at the back of the property that led into the basement. They moved quickly, staying in the shadows, their footfalls muffled against the gravel driveway. Harris's heart pounded in his chest as they reached the door, and Jenkins worked his magic on the lock. A soft click, and the door creaked open. Let's move, Harris said. They descended into the dark, musty basement of the mansion, where the air was thick with dust. The sound of muffled voices drifted down from above, making it clear that the meeting was already in progress. Harris's gut twisted. He had no idea what kind of conversation was taking place above, but the names he had seen in the files, powerful. Politicians, business tycoons, and now Trump, meant that whatever was happening here was much bigger than just Kane's little operation. This was a conspiracy of monumental proportions. They made their way through the basement, moving quietly as they approached the stairwell that would take them up to the ground floor. Harris motioned for them to stop, listening intently. The voices above had grown louder, more distinct. We're nearly there. Once we've got the votes, we can move forward with the new administration, a voice said, unmistakably Donald Trump's. Kane, you have my full support. Let's just make sure everything goes according to plan. Kane, The name sent a chill down Harris's spine. "Of course, Mr. President. Everything is in place," Kane responded smoothly. "I've handled the rest. The AI is running as expected. It's only a matter of time before we're in full control. The reforms will go through without a hitch. You'll have the support you need, and we'll wipe out all opposition." A cold realization hit Harris like a slap in the face. This wasn't just about control. It was about the complete subjugation of the nation. The plan they had uncovered wasn't a political shift. It was a coup. Kane and Trump were not just in league with one another. They were orchestrating a new order, one where they controlled everything, from the economy to the government to the very people who ran the country. "We're not just talking about the city anymore, are we?" Harris muttered to himself. Jenkins, standing next to him, heard it and nodded grimly. "It's bigger than we thought. They're going for total control." They didn't have time to waste. The moment they walked into that room, it was going to be game over if they weren't careful. Harris needed a distraction, something big enough to throw them off guard. "Okay, here's the plan," he whispered. "Jenkins, you're with me. The rest of you, create a diversion. Get Kane and his men focused on you and keep them busy while Jenkins and I move in." Jenkins nodded. "Got it." With everything set, they ascended the stairs, silently creeping, toward the source of the voices. As they reached the top, Harris peered around the corner into a large, lavishly decorated room. At the far end, seated at an oval table, were Kane, Donald Trump, and a handful of high-ranking officials and businessmen. They were all deep in conversation, unaware that they were about to be exposed. "This is it," Harris said, his voice low but urgent. "On my signal." They waited for a moment, watching the scene unfold before them. Harris's eyes locked onto Trump, whose face was stern as he discussed the next phase of the plan. But Kane was the one who caught his attention, the way he sat so confidently, so arrogantly, like he was already the one in control. "Now," Harris ordered. Jenkins moved first, swiftly and silently, cutting across the room toward the security systems, while Harris took a different route, making his way toward the table where the conspirators sat. It was chaos from the moment Jenkins activated the system. The lights flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. Panic erupted, the sounds of chairs scraping across the floor, frantic voices, and the sudden shuffle of bodies moving in confusion filled the room. But the darkness wasn't just an inconvenience, it was an advantage. Harris took full advantage of the confusion, closing the gap between himself and Kane. His heart raced, his mind focused solely on the man who had been the architect of so much destruction. Kane's voice cut through the chaos, his confidence unshaken. "You think you can stop this, Harris? You can't. You've already lost. The world has already changed." Harris didn't flinch. "We haven't lost yet, Kane, and you're not going to get away with this." With a swift motion, he grabbed Kane by the arm, pulling him to his feet and forcing him toward the center of the room. But as he did, a sharp crack rang out. Pain exploded through Harris's side, and he stumbled, gasping for air. His vision blurred as he looked down, seeing the red stain of blood spreading across his shirt. "Boss!" Jenkins yelled from across the room, but the voice sounded distant. Everything felt distant. Harris's body went cold. Someone had betrayed them. Someone in the room had fired. But who? Kane's face twisted into a smirk, and he nodded towards someone in the shadows. "I told you, you never had a chance."